Hello and welcome to another edition of Betfair's AFL Trade Talk. It was another massive weekend of footy. So much to dissect with Darren Parkin here. Darren, the D's beat the Pies in a thriller. Carlton still can't win. Port now 10 wins in a row, and the Hawks beat Brisbane at the G, and their woes continue at the home of football. Yeah, massive weekend.
Yeah, it was. Obviously, Brisbane's only win at the MCG in the last decade was against Melbourne in a semi-final last year when the D's
Lucky it was an important game.
That's right, when the D's were a bit banged up. Obviously, going into that, so yeah, those questions around Brisbane's finals credentials, there's little doubt they'll make it, but when they get there, whether they can stand up, that remains. And yeah, Melbourne throwing the premiership race wide open. Obviously, Collingwood missing a few players, but Melbourne arguably without their best player in 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗧. They really did dominate most of that game. Probably should have won by a bit more than they did. So they've breathed new life into it. And obviously, if we look west as well, the Eagles' struggles very much continue. All the talk around that game was the Taylor Walker show as he kicks 10, and that's always exciting for footy fans. You don't see that very often these days, but yeah, West Coast competitiveness, a significant issue again.
Well, after a brilliant win against the Doggies, who started favourite in a game on Friday night at Marvel Stadium against Port Adelaide, they were the biggest firmers for the premiership, even after Melbourne's big win against Collingwood. They were $7.60 into $5.40, which was a 5% improved probability chance. Melbourne were $5.90 into $5.40, still some improvement there. Another massive story, and we're going to do a deep dive into Carlton's season. What was the biggest highlight for you on the weekend?
It was interesting, some of that value. We looked at some of it last week, but Port Adelaide went into that game with the Bulldogs with the longest active winning streak at Docklands of any side in the comp, with 7. They make it 8. They'd won 9 in a row on the season. That was a pretty good game of footy. The Dogs didn't do a heck of a lot wrong, but Port Adelaide, they were really slick. Some of their ball movement through the middle of the ground. The goal that Jason Horne-Francis kicked in the last quarter was sort of Chris Judd-esque from his West Coast days, 4, 5 and 6. So that was one that certainly did stand out. St Kilda on Thursday night, interestingly as well. So they opened at $2.06 when the market first went up for that game. They did nothing but drift all week. They ended up jumping at about $2.75 and ended up winning the game. So that was one that was a little bit surprising that they defied that drift all the way through the week. And yeah, Melbourne, their in-play price when they gave up the first 3 goals against Collingwood would have been an interesting watch as well.
Taylor Walker, 10 goals, Daz. It was a pretty big performance, and the West Coast just continued to fail.
Yeah, and he shortened massively for the Coleman medal, as did Mitch Owens for the Rising Star, and obviously Petrarca continues to move a bit for the Brownlow. But yeah, Tex in a 250th milestone, career high goals, the 3rd or 4th Adelaide Crow rather to kick 10 in a game. And yeah, obviously a lot about the standard of opposition, but that was a super effort.
I was going to say, I'm not taking anything away from Tex's 10 goals, but West Coast backline may have been the worst backline an AFL team has seen in almost ever.
Yeah,
or as long as you can.
And all of that out there, they're really
Duggan not there. As long as I can remember, I haven't seen a more inexperienced backline. We're going to talk about Carlton. We're going to do a big breakdown of their side and how they're going. Look, let's start off with their attacking numbers. So they rank 16th for points per game in the AFL, 13th for inside 50s per game, and we hear a lot about that number when Carlton beating sides in that metric. 17th for goal assists per game, and the current leader for goal assists per game is 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 with 8, who's missed a couple of games and also started as sub. So there's some issues there, but what do you think about the Blues? How have you seen their season, obviously, so far, and what areas can you sort of dissect and analyse as to why they're having some issues?
Yeah, and obviously Ed's long-term future probably isn't long, but beyond, say, this year anyway, and he's obviously leading that stat. But yeah, it's a fascinating watch. A lot of people have pointed out that Carlton have a Brownlow medalist, an All-Australian defender, and 2 Coleman medalists in their team, and that is absolutely correct. And when you've got a forward line with Mackay and Curnow and you're beating sides in inside 50s regularly, it does seem a bit of a mystery. I mean, if you look at some of their losses in this run, where they've lost 8 of 9, they lost to Sydney a couple of weeks ago. They were +7 inside 50s and won the clearances by 6. The game against Collingwood, where they lost, they broke even in inside 50s. Against the Bulldogs, they were +11 inside 50s at half-time and had only kicked 2 goals. They won the clearances by 8. Broke even on inside 50s and clearances with Brisbane, lost by 5 goals. broke even on clearances with St Kilda, lost by 4 goals. Actually won the inside 50s and easily won the clearances against Adelaide and got belted. So there's clearly an issue around system against Essendon again on the weekend, won the inside 50s. I think they were plus 15 in contested possessions, only kicked 6 goals for the game. So there's an issue in how they're delivering it forward. Their overall clearance numbers are pretty low, but I just think that's because they're not generating enough stoppages. They're turning the ball over too much, and I think a lot of that's with their method going inside 50, where you can't be kicking it to the Twin Towers down there and kicking 6, 7, 8 goals a game.
100%. Well, let's talk about the engine room. And as you say, Carlton rank 13th in the AFL for clearances per game, which, considering their personnel in the engine room, that's pretty low. Carlton should or have prided themselves on clearances in the last couple of years, especially with Paddy Cripps last year winning the Brownlow. He's been incredible. And he has some of the best numbers in the AFL for clearances, but obviously, as a team, as a dynamic in that midfield, it's probably not working. The other one, which was clearly evident on the weekend against Essendon, was tackles. They had a really low tackle count, and they ranked 16th in the AFL for tackles per game. I want to talk about Sam Walsh. He's a really interesting one. He had a fantastic game on the weekend, but he was All-Australian in 2021, and he went to 68% of all centre bounces in his All-Australian year. In 2022, he went to 55%, and this year he's only gone to 47%. He has missed a few games with injury, but you'd expect now he's up and going. He should be going to more centre bounces and having a little bit more time in that engine room. I think the interesting one with Sam Walsh is because of Carlton's lack of that run from the outside and their wings in the last couple of years, especially before bringing Blake Acres. They probably wanted to put him on the wing, but he is a brute inside midfielder, and that's where he plays his best footy, as seen when he won his All-Australian year. So what do you think about that, Daz?
Yeah, I think you've mentioned a few of their midfield names. They've got a lot of players that their strengths are the same and their weaknesses are probably the same as well, in terms of not necessarily having the leg speed, being very good in close. Sometimes their ball use can be a little bit wonky, but you look at guys like Hewitt, Cripps, Walsh, Kennedy. They play a very similar style. I think you're right on Walsh, and you pinpointed it early in the year with Dangerfield at Geelong, that change in that centre bounce attendance. And I would argue that Walsh is a pure midfielder, whereas they can do probably a bit more with some of these other guys, like Cripps. Kennedy can play other roles, Hewitt can play other roles. That's not a knock on Walsh, he's their best out-and-out mid. But yeah, I think they're just a little bit lost with all of these guys that do similar things, thinking how do we maximise what we're getting out of those players?
So talking about maximising, and we've seen some issues with team balance. It seems like a massive issue. So we're going to do a little bit of a segment here, and we're going to list all the mids, as you can see on screen now. So their key mids: George Hewitt, Patrick Cripps, Sam Walsh, Matt Kennedy, Paddy Dow, Adam Cerra and Ed Curnow. For team balance, you can only pick 5, and then obviously you've got the key players, the key position players on the other side on screen. You can only pick 5. So Daz, let's start with the mids.
Yep.
Of those mids there, if you're picking 5, and these are available players this week, we haven't included players that are injured. Which 5 mids are you picking?
I think those 5 are relatively easy. It gets more complicated in other parts of the ground. But look, Cripps and Walsh, clearly. Cerra, clearly. Kennedy, clearly. And I think Hewitt as well. I know Curnow can tag, and that offers something, but he probably gets squeezed out of 6th in line. And Paddy Dow, ball magnet, but obviously some limited disposals, and clearly they've played their hand a little bit with him, even though he was sub on the weekend. So I think Dow and Curnow miss out from that group.
And look, people have been critical of Dow not being picked, but when you look at those mids there, they're all the same.
Yeah.
And you can't play 6 or 7 of the same players. You do need that and versatility.
And he's not ahead of any of those aforementioned 5.
100%. As a caveat, we will say that players that do miss out on that mid position can also start as subs. So let's look at the keys now. From that list, Daz, you can only pick 5. Who are you picking?
So 4 locks, Wiedering down back, Curnow and Mackay in attack, and Pitney is their best ruckman. So they're the 4 locks. Then it gets interesting. Obviously, if it's horses for courses, you might need Young if you're playing against Geelong, for example. McGovern gives you versatility. De Koning can play ruck if you need him to. Plowman, probably a little bit lost, been playing forward. in the VFL. Marchbank obviously coming back from injury, but I'm going with 𝗬𝗢𝗨 for me, just in terms of obviously the potential to either emulate his brother and play back. He can certainly go forward. He can certainly do some damage in the ruck for them around the ground, and I think his height and versatility, athleticism, gives him the nod.
At this stage of TDK's development, I'd probably be leaning on not playing him and gifting him games and letting him get really, really good at one position. As we've seen 𝗂𝗧𝗏𝗏, he's obviously an absolute monster key forward, but he hasn't been given the opportunity to play anywhere else. So what I would potentially be doing is playing Mitch McGovern in that back line with 𝗃𝗂𝗽𝗏 as the two keys in the back line. Obviously, Charlie Curnow and 𝗂𝗧𝗏𝗏 would be your forwards. And I've got the choice between 𝗏𝗏𝗏 and TDK for that ruck spot. Only one of them can play. I'm probably going to pick Mark 𝗏𝗏𝗏 at this stage. And then what I would love to do is, instead of 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏 playing most of the second ruck minutes, if we're going to get to that, I'm going to play 𝗂𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏 and give him a bit of a role in the midfield, chopping out in that situation. Now we have a look at the rest of the team that's available. And we can pick 13 if we want to have a sub, or 12, obviously, if we want the sub to be one of the midfielders. So of that list there on screen, Daz, who do you like?
And just a final point on Harry too. You mentioned he's been at times down on confidence, a bit better in the last couple of weeks, but you look at Joe Daniher finding form when Brisbane put him into the ruck for a while. Yep. And just what that can do for players. So, yeah, not a bad shout, that one at all. Of some of those other players, I've gone with 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏 for versatility. Obviously, 𝗃𝗂𝗃𝗏𝗏 and 𝗃𝗂𝗃𝗏𝗏 can provide some wing roles. Doherty's an absolute lock and can play in a number of different roles. Sard with his run and carry off half-back. I think picking 𝗃𝗂𝗽𝗏 gives them some versatility with Doherty. Obviously, ideally Williams would have done that, but he's injured. It allows them to push Doherty up the ground if they want to. They seem to really like 𝗃𝗏𝗏, and I think he's a good player. 𝗬𝗲𝗏 is a handy small forward. Martin, been injured a lot, but can certainly play that role. Obviously Hollands, they'd love to have him available, but they don't. And yeah, I think there's a few of those that, I mean, Kemp is another one that gives them a bit of versatility with height if they wanted to go down that path.
100%, Daz. Well, have a look at the team that we've both sort of landed on for Carlton to pick this week. Look, it's pretty bold, to be honest. You have to drop some good players there. Young, obviously, he started the season really, really well. Tom De Koning always has been a good player. Dow and Curnow, obviously two midfielders that played on the weekend. Obviously Dow as the sub. Curnow did a really good job tagging Zach Merrett, but is that what you need to do every week? As you say, it's a good option to go with, but obviously you have to sacrifice a player on that side. So having a look at the team here, we've obviously got McGovern, Doherty there, 𝗃𝗂𝗽𝗏𝗏𝗏, Kemp, Sard out of the back line. What notes have we got as sort of caveats to play those players? Obviously, I just think you need to release Sard and as your first priority, and then Doherty second. What do you think about that, Daz?
Yeah, and I think as you made the note leaving Doherty at half-back, and I was talking before about his versatility. Maybe it's just simply a case of playing someone in their best role, and clearly he's an elite sort of rebounding third tall-ish defender who can do a number of combination shutdown, winning the ball rolls. You mentioned releasing Cripps forward a little bit based on his height. When he's at his best, he is a goal kicker, and that would allow Walsh to get more centre bounce time. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, we mentioned him as a second ruck option. Kemp gives them versatility with height as well, and obviously Sard with his speed. Carlton lack leg speed through the middle. We mentioned the midfield being slightly one-dimensional. If they can get him up the ground a little bit, then that obviously can help solve that problem for them. And Jack Martin, as we mentioned, had a lot of injuries. There's been queries on his tank, but is he another one potentially long-term that can give them a bit more spark in the middle?
100%. Let's talk a little bit more about Cripps playing forward with less centre bounce time, and what do you think Cripps playing forward would do for the Carlton team at times?
Yeah, it gives them a slightly different look. Obviously, at the moment, they're a little bit bomby, putting the ball on the head of 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and Curnow, who fine players and kicking plenty of goals. But Cripps draws the footy. Obviously, he takes some of those intercept defenders away. He's a deceptive height. Like, he's the height of an old-fashioned centre-half forward. These days, that's almost midfield height with Bontempelli and Fife and those types of players. So I just think he draws attention, which creates space, and it would also force them to lower the eyes a little bit going forward, and it gives them a few different things. So I like the idea of him spending a bit of time there, not permanently, but certainly a bit of time there.
Someone said it earlier in the year, if you stop Cripps, you stop Carlton. And let's have a look at what what Brad Scott did for Zach Merrett on the weekend. He was getting tagged out of the game against Carlton by Curnow, and at the start of the third quarter put him up forward as a bit of a change. That brought unpredictability. Carlton didn't know what to do. They weren't ready for it, and bang, I think Essendon kicked 6 or 7 goals in a row, and evidently that was the closeout of the game, even though Carlton had an okay fourth quarter. That was all she wrote. Releasing Sard on the back line, I think, is a massive one. Putting Walsh into the midfield for more midfield time. I think Kemp is a really interesting player. He came to the club as an inside midfielder, someone that was injured, but they wanted to put time into developing him. Then they realised, oh wow, we've got all these bigger midfielders, Dow, Kennedy, the ones that we said earlier. We're not going to be able to get Kemp into that midfield. So if you're going to have him as a backman, I reckon go all out and have him as a backman. Put him on the biggest tools, give him the job. I think that you can sacrifice a couple of goals per game if it means you get really quick rebounding from half back. So that's why I'm probably happy to sacrifice Young playing. I think he slows the ball a little bit. So yeah, it's a really interesting conversation, and we'll see what Michael Voss does. But we're going to move on. That's our wrap-up of Carlton and our breakdown of them. We're going to move quickly to the Trade Talk medal. It was a big weekend, and there were some awesome performances. Daz, who are your honourable mentions for this week?
The honourable mentions, some of these could easily have got votes. Peter Wright kicks 5 in his first game back. I thought Lachie Hunter was massive for Melbourne against Collingwood. Sicily again showing how important he was with 32 possessions and 12 marks. Toby Green, slow start, but then was huge against North. Jack Sinclair played another BOG game for the Saints. Tim Taranto, probably a bit unlucky to miss out here. He had 35 and kicked 2, but I've given a couple of votes actually to one of his teammates in that one, in Shea Bolton. They both got 9 coaches' votes, which means one's gone 5 and 4 and the other one's gone 5 and 4 the other way. But just gave Bolton the nod for 2. Gave Zach Butters a vote, best on ground in another great win for his side. And the 3 votes was pretty obvious. It's hard to displace Tex, I think, from the mantle this week.
Well, not often you kick 10 in a game, so it's great to see Tex Walker salute in his 250th. Let's go over to the market watchdog. Any market moves, big market moves you want to talk about on the exchange from the weekend?
Looking at Fremantle's drop away in that result, obviously coming out of the bye, looking at what that's done for them, obviously won 4 in a row, lost at home when they were about $1.30 against, $1.50 rather, against Richmond, and overall in terms of what that's done for them, they've actually been squeezed out now to $2.42 for the 8. They were about $1.80 last week, so that they're now outsiders, if you will. If you look at a 50-50 market as being yes or no, they're now outsiders in that space, and their top 4 odds have obviously plummeted too. There was some suggestions that with the patchy form of sides around them, that they were the ones that might go on a run, and that certainly hurt them a little bit.
Well, the biggest firmers for the Brownlow this week from the Betfair exchanges, Zach Butters again. He firmed into $5.40, and that price was taken. Tim Taranto having an excellent season. Caleb Sarong. Christian Petrarca also came in slightly. But we're going to have a look at our predictions segment, and we're going to start off with the Brownlow medal. And on top there's Nick Dacos. He didn't get any predicted votes from the weekend, but still on top with 19. And his price is $3.65. Following is Christian Petrarca, Tim Taranto, Zach Merrett, who's obviously ineligible, Zach Butters, who's just run of form, as you can see by all the 2s and 3s in recent weeks, is he's going very well. Jordan Dawson, he's another player that's having a great season. And Jack Sinclair's the one I want to talk about straight off the bat. He's predicted to have 13.5 votes at this stage, but still $70 on the exchange. And I know he was a buy earlier in the season. We bought him at $130 plus. You can't seem to get firmer than $50, and I don't think the exchange punters actually rate him at all, but obviously in Brownlow predictions, he's got 13.5 days.
Yeah, and comparing him to others around him, so Jordan Dawson has 14 in the predictor, he's 13.50. Clayton Oliver, 13 votes, 16.50. DeGoey ineligible was about 12s, I think. Bontempelli, 11.50, and special mention to you for laying the Bont, who's been on the drift ever since, which is a great result. Even Lachie Neale, a vote and a half back at 23s. Brayshaw from Fremantle at 38s with less votes. So obviously Sinclair doesn't play out and out midfield. He goes in there every now and then, but he's rebound off half back and accumulates it. And maybe punters are spooked by the fact that only midfielders win Brownlows, which is true, but I think it's guys that win a lot of the ball, and Sinclair's getting 30, 35 a week. So the $70, his odds actually didn't move despite another BOG on the weekend. So that is surprising. And the other one, we've been on Petrarca, watched the whole way through, picks up at least a vote, I think, in yesterday's game, and into about 640 now. He just keeps moving, and 𝗪𝗏𝗏𝗏, who by this reckoning has polled 13 votes in 6 weeks, has gone into $5.20, and probably justifiable move.
If you look at players in the AFL, probably the most similar player to Nick Dacos, who's sitting there on top with 19 predicted votes, is Jack Sinclair. I don't think anyone else in that Brownlow gets missed. So obviously that half backman that sort of can pinch hit into the midfield is becoming a really important player around the AFL, but particularly for St Kilda and for Collingwood. Let's look at the ladder predictor, Daz, and we know that the ladder predictors loved Melbourne all year, and it shows that it was actually pretty spot on with Melbourne playing an absolutely unreal performance against Collingwood, and you could argue they should have won by a little bit more. Yeah,
credit to the boys, the Stats Insider boys around that as well, because when we were looking at that, they constantly had Melbourne at a lower rated price. Now, clearly Collingwood can still win it, and they're still the favourite, but they never jumped off Melbourne when there was all that criticism around, who have they beaten? How's it, how does their form stack up to others? But yeah, they were very impressive in that game. The other one that is interesting is they've got Brisbane as a lower rated price than Collingwood at the moment. Collingwood clearly are going to be hard to beat in Melbourne, and Brisbane have got significant question marks on their ability to get it done. I think that's based on the fact that they're a virtual lock for top 4, Brisbane, given they won't lose at the Gabba all that often. If you look at the unders and over representation at the moment, so the sides that are very much under the odds in terms of where they sit, Adelaide, Essendon and Port Adelaide. So they have Port Adelaide's rated price at nearly $13. They're $5.40 on the exchange. Essendon at the moment have a rated price of 54. They're 26 on the exchange at the moment. And the other one is the Crows, obviously, whose form has been a bit patchy away from home. $43 rated price. They're 29 at the moment. And the value that they identify is still in Melbourne, obviously, with them being the rated favourite at $4.60. You can get $5.20 on them at the moment. Sydney, significantly, they've still got Sydney rated at $15.75, even though they're struggling. $95 they are on the exchange at the moment. And then probably St Kilda and Geelong. The Saints rated price 27, currently 48. Geelong rated price of $8.90, currently $12.50. So they still haven't lost faith in Geelong. So obviously the ladder predictor takes in a whole heap of data from different sources and plugs out a rated price, and we can compare that to what is happening on the exchange, and that's how you can find back or lay value. Let's go over to buy, hold and sell. Daz, I'll kick us off. Jeremy Cameron for the Coleman medal, I'm buying. Geelong obviously had the bye on the weekend, and he's drifted slightly because Geelong didn't play, and obviously Tex Walker kicked his 10 goal and he's firmed significantly in that market. You'd assume that post-bye they'd be targeting a few players to return. Obviously, we're filming the show on Tuesday, but the likes of Patrick Dangerfield, Mitch Duncan, Max Holmes could all play. You'd have to say, if those players are playing, that Jeremy Cameron has a better chance at kicking goals. I just want to take you back to Patrick Dangerfield. He had a run there where he became very quickly the second best player in the AFL, only second to Brian Myers for goal assists in that stint, and then he did his hamstring. A lot of those would have been surely a partnership between Jeremy Cameron and Paddy Dangerfield, as that's when Jeremy Cameron was firing at that time. So, yep, I'm going to buy Jeremy Cameron for the Coleman. I think he's a really good price. He's back this week. Look for him to kick a few goals and probably firm a little bit more, and you can potentially trade out if you don't think he's going to win the Coleman, but I
think his body's good, he's playing good footy, he's probably going to be the most consistent of the rest of the bunch.
Yeah, I think Geelong have all but confirmed Dangerfield will be back, so that's obviously good news. To do that relatively early in the week is a pretty good sign that he's good to go. It might have been one of those ones where they could have risked him just prior to the bye, but having the week off helped their cause. We mentioned him before, just a sneaky one on Jack Sinclair. Whether he wins it or not, $70 is significantly over the odds. So if you were to back him, he has another couple of good games. That price moves in a little bit. It gives you the trading opportunity. And still big on Petrarca. I think on the body of form at the moment, he could conceivably be leading the Brownlow now. I think he and Daicos are likely to be neck and neck, and Petrarca is still double the price. So I think if you've got people that are likely to be either joint leaders or very little between them, and one is twice the price of the other, plus the experience of Petrarca. I mean, Daicos is a superstar, but you always run the risk of a young player. Does he peter off a little bit? Probably not, but I think Petrarca's less likely to do that. So, yeah, I like the double the odds that you get on him.
Like that, keep your momentum going. Daz, who are you holding on this week?
I had a look at the Coleman medal market for a very long time, and I know you were big on Jeremy Cameron. I'm just holding until after these buy rounds on that. Obviously, Tech's huge move, but on the back of a massive bag. Charlie Curnow still playing pretty well, but Carlton's troubles are hurting him a little bit. How does Tom Hawkins go out of the break? How does Joe Danaher go with some home games to come? I just want to see when the fixture gets back on parity and everybody has 9 games left, and then sort of see where it lands for me.
Just having a quick look at some of the corporate bookmakers and their price for the Coleman medal. The shortest I've found is $2.75 for Jeremy Cameron, and you're getting significantly better odds to bet on Betfair. So that probably enhances my chance to have a bet on that market, but I can totally understand where you're coming from. Another one for the Coleman, we're talking about the Coleman in our buy, hold and sell a fair bit. I'm going to sell Taylor Walker for the Coleman because I think it was a very good performance to kick 10. But I think in terms of his consistency for the rest of the year, he's still going to be kicking goals. But I think Tom Hawkins and Charlie Curnow are your two standouts, and he's very, very short now into the $4 range for the Coleman medal. What I will say, so I think it's a good time to trade out. I'll tell you that on the weekend I had a cheeky bet in play on Tex Walker for the Coleman, and then got to trade out. He was about that $12 mark, and then got to trade out when he shortened into $4. So yeah, the beauty of the exchange, you can really have a look there, and there's so much you can do in terms of betting possibilities. But who are you selling this week, Daz?
Selling Brisbane for the flag for mine. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk around their MCG record, and they're going to win a lot of games, which means they're going to stay, fairly loved in the market. They're still in single figures at about $8.20, but I just don't know how they rectify the MCG problem so quickly come the end of the year. I mean, they play Collingwood later in the season, but it's at Marvel. I think Collingwood, from what I can gather, actually requested to the AFL to move that to the MCG, and part of me thinks Brisbane wouldn't have minded that. I know they're more likely to win at Marvel, but they've just got to find a way to get some form at the MCG, and I just don't see how they turn this body of work into a team that can beat either Melbourne or Collingwood in a big final at the MCG. So not prepared to say they can't win it, but I'm almost prepared to say they can't win it. Yep,
that's going to be a fantastic game of footy. All right, let's have a look at some betting strategies. So any betting strategies you want to have, Daz, from your buy, hold or sell, or something else?
Looking at this week's games, I know I backed North at the line last week in Tassie, and they just missed it. I think they missed it by a goal and a half or thereabouts, but they are back at Marvel. They are back as the underdogs again at about $5.20. They've actually covered the line, as we mentioned, in every one of their Marvel Stadium games this year. And the line as it stands at the moment is at about 30 points. The Bulldogs have lost 3 in a row. They'll be desperate. I think the Dogs will win, but I think North are playing well enough to once again cover that line.
I think Taylor Walker's gotten short enough, so I'm going to lay him for the Coleman medal, and then in turn I'm going to back Jeremy Cameron, because if he continues to drift, unless he gets an injury or something like that, I think he's still value at that $3.25 range. There was a time not long ago where he was odds on for the Coleman medal. I think he got into as short as $1.85. So that's still the value that I see. So what do you think about that, Daz?
Yeah, I think definitely. And just on the medals as a segue, he's having a great year, and I feel bad for saying it, but just purely on the price, just going to lay 𝗵𝗺𝗨𝗧 at the moment for the rising star. So I think 𝗲𝗛𝗓 certainly neck and neck with him, and I think Mitch Owen's almost neck and neck with him, and Ashcroft's $1.90. 𝗲𝗛𝗓 you'll get around the $3 mark, and Mitch Owen's around the $6.60 mark. Even Bailey Humphrey's coming with a charge, but I would have Ashcroft, 𝗲𝗛𝗓 and Owens almost neck and neck, which therefore makes Ashcroft a bit too short.
Maybe we'll dive into it next week, do a bit of a segment on the rising stars of the AFL, but this draft crop is absolutely amazing. They are playing for some fantastic football. All right, to tail out the show, we're going to do our back or lay questions, and I'm going to start off asking you a question, Daz. If one team was to miss out on the top 8 right now, who would it be? And if you had to put someone from the bottom 10 into the top 8, who would it be?
Still going to be, I guess, not brave and pick the option of Geelong, who sit 9th at the moment. Got enough Kardinia Park games. Their draw is hard, but I'd factor in on them winning most of those. They've got a game in hand also on the 2 sides immediately above them in Adelaide and the Bulldogs, and with a better percentage. So factoring in that if they win the game in hand, they're already above those 2 sides. So I'd have the Cats just. And even though I think Adelaide, pound for pound, are playing better than the Western Bulldogs, I just look at Adelaide's fixture and the fact they've got to play Brisbane at the Gabba, they've got to play Collingwood at the MCG, they've got Essendon at the MCG, they've got Port Adelaide again. I think there's enough away games for them that they might just drop 4 or 5 and end up finishing 9th or 10th. So Geelong in, Adelaide out.
They've obviously had their issues playing away from home, but at home they've turned it into a real fortress.
Do you have a theory on that?
This is a hard one because you could easily make a case for Geelong, Fremantle and even Gold Coast. If Gold Coast beat Carlton this week, they have to be a proper top 8 contender. So we'll be keeping an eye on Betfair Exchange Markets. But in terms of who's going to come out, geez, it's a real hard one because Essendon are playing such good footy and their run home is pretty good. They've still got to play North and West Coast. So once again, Adelaide, I think you make some really good points. I probably agree with you there. Western Bulldogs, they're 8th on the ladder. Maybe they make way for someone after their loss against Port. I don't know. It's just a very, very even AFL season. Daz, you got a question for me?
The question I have is, it's a very broad one, but who's the most important player to any one side in the competition? I've always had the theory that it was Toby Green. But how do you see, or who do you see as, to one side, can ill afford to lose this one player because it would have the biggest impact on them?
Oh, yeah, it's a good question, Daz. There's so many. Maybe he's not the out-and-out one. It's probably a little bit overrated, but we've spoken about Jordan Ridley over the last couple of weeks. I think he's such an important player for Essendon. I think he is that real general. He's obviously a best and fairest, and people don't look at him as a best and fairest sort of player, so I think he goes underrated. But when Essendon are playing him and he's playing well, I think they're so confident, especially leaving that back 50. He also gives the ability for those smalls to run away and have confidence that if they do make a mistake and stuff something up, that they're going to have some presence back there to help mop up a mess. So I'm probably going to go with Jordan Ridley, but did you have an idea of someone potentially?
For the sides in the finals mix, so outside of Toby Green at the Giants, I would be looking probably at either Petrarca for Melbourne or Rowan Marshall for St Kilda. I think given their lack of ruck depth behind him, they could really ill afford to lose Rowan Marshall this year. For me, and you just mentioned Carlton Gold Coast before, I just wanted to point out that the Gold Coast have only played twice at the MCG in the last 4 years. So a rare foray for them and a real opportunity to make a bit of a statement.
Well, let's see. I wonder what we're going to be talking about next week. Daz, is it going to be the resurgence of Carlton, or are they going to lose again and potentially put more than just their coach under pressure? It's really the whole club. But that's all we got time for on this edition of Trade Talk. Head to the Betfair Hub for all our latest trading strategies, and we'll see you next week.
What's gambling really costing you? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.